The year is 2007, a maximum security prison in West London, meant to hold some of the most dangerous criminals in the UK. But today, something unthinkable is about to happen. Inside these walls is Joe Farnan, a man who refuses to be locked away. He has a plan, one that no one sees coming. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., Farnan collapses in his prison cell. His body convulses violently, his breathing labored. Prison officers rush in, believing the notorious inmate is suffering from a seizure. A medical emergency is declared. Within minutes, an ambulance arrives and Farnan, flanked by 3 prison officers, is transported to Hammersmith Hospital for treatment. Everything seems routine, that is, until they arrive. As the officers wheel him inside, 2 masked men suddenly appear. One is holding a loaded handgun, the other carrying bolt cutters. They move fast, catching the prison guards off guard. Before they can react, the gunman presses the barrel of his weapon against an officer's head. "Let him go, now!" The officers hesitate, knowing the risk, but it's clear they are outgunned, outnumbered, and completely caught off guard. Within seconds, Farnan is unshackled and thrown into a waiting getaway car. The masked men jump in, and before anyone can react, they disappear into the streets of London. But here's the thing, this wasn't Farnan's first escape. So the question is, how did Joe Farnan become one of the most elusive criminals in UK history? Did he get caught? Where is he now? And how did a simple prisoner fool the system time and time again? All will be answered. You are now watching Kingpin Media. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me tell you about Joe Farnan, because this guy wasn't your typical criminal. He wasn't just some reckless thug who got caught in a moment of desperation. No, Farnan was calculated, unpredictable, and highly intelligent, the kind of guy that made prison authorities nervous. Before his infamous escape in 2007, he had already escaped from prison twice before. Think about that. Most criminals never break out. And if they do, it's usually a one-time stroke of luck. But Farnan, he had made a habit out of it. 3 escapes in total, and each time, his methods became bolder, more intricate, and even more humiliating for the prison system. So how does a guy go from being an inmate to a full-blown escape artist, feared by law enforcement and capable of outwitting the system over and over again? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all started. Now, Farnan wasn't born into a life of crime, but he sure embraced it early on. By the early 2000s, at age 24, he had already established himself as a career criminal, specializing in armed robbery, high-speed getaways, and weapons possession. This wasn't just a guy nicking TVs from a shop. He was organized, working within serious criminal circles. Eventually, the law caught up with him. He was convicted of conspiracy to rob, aggravated vehicle taking, possession of a bladed weapon. And let's be clear, these aren't petty offenses. This is the kind of stuff that gets you locked away for a long time. Because of the seriousness of his crimes, he wasn't sent to some open, low-security facility. He was shipped off to HMP Wormwood Scrubs, one of London's Category B prisons, where the system believed they could contain him. Here's where things get interesting. Farnan was given an indeterminate sentence for public protection, IPP, meaning he wouldn't just serve a fixed number of years and walk free. Instead, he had to convince a parole board that he was no longer a threat before they would even consider releasing him. At minimum, he was looking at 5 years behind bars before he could even apply for parole. But let's be real, Farnan had zero intention of waiting that long. Because for most prisoners, an IPP sentence is something that breaks them down, something they dread. But for Farnan, it wasn't an obstacle, it was a challenge. To him, prison wasn't the end of the road. It was just a temporary inconvenience. And from the moment those cell doors closed behind him, he was already working on his way out. All right, picture this. It's May 2000, and Joe Farnan is locked up at Feltham Young Offender Institution, a place notorious for holding some of the UK's most troubled and dangerous young inmates. But for Farnan, this wasn't just a prison. It was a puzzle, a challenge, a place to test just how far he could push the system. Now, most inmates accept their fate. They sit behind bars, counting down the days, hoping for early release. But Farnan wasn't like most inmates. He didn't see a prison sentence as something to be served. He saw it as something to be beaten. And his first escape? It was nothing short of genius. Let me ask you something. If you were a prison officer and you saw an inmate hanging in his cell, what would you do? Exactly. You'd rush in. No hesitation. No second thoughts. You wouldn't be thinking about security, protocols, or risks. You'd just be trying to save a life. And that's exactly what Farnan counted on. One night, he staged his own suicide. He set up the scene perfectly, making it look like he had hung himself in his cell. His body limp, his breathing shallow. It looked real. The prison officers saw him and panicked. They had no time to think. They had to act. Within seconds, the cell door was unlocked. That's when everything changed. As soon as the door swung open, Farnan sprang to life. Before the officer even realized what was happening, Farnan grabbed a sharpened pencil, his only weapon, and jabbed it into the guard's neck. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to cause serious pain and confusion. In that split second of shock, he overpowered the guard, snatched his keys, and made his move. Now, at this point, the prison was still running normally. No alarms had been raised. No one knew what was happening. And that's what made his next move so effective. Have you ever heard the phrase, hiding in plain sight? That's exactly what Farnan did next. He didn't run through the corridors like a madman, setting off alarms. He didn't break down doors or fight his way out. Instead, he walked right past security, blending in with a group of visitors. Think about it. Prisons have visiting hours, and at Feltham, the reception area was always busy with families coming in and out. No one was paying attention to one extra person walking through. By the time anyone realized he was missing, Farnan was already gone. Now, if this were a movie, maybe Farnan would have made it. Maybe he would have disappeared into the streets of London, changed his identity, and never been caught. But reality, it's not that easy. Farnan was free, but he was also a wanted man. For the next few days, he managed to stay off the grid, moving between different locations, keeping his head down. But it wasn't enough. The police were on high alert, searching every possible hideout. And eventually they caught up with him. Joe Farnan was back behind bars. For most inmates, escaping once is a miracle. It's something few people ever pull off. But for Joe Farnan, this was just a warm-up. Because one escape wasn't enough. He wasn't going to sit behind bars and accept his fate. No. He had already proved that prison wasn't inescapable, that the system could be outsmarted, that if you planned well enough, if you were bold enough, you could beat them. And that's exactly what he was going to do. Again, and again, and again. The next time he escaped, it would be even bigger, even more daring, and far more embarrassing for the authorities. By 2005, Joe Farnan was no longer locked inside the high-security walls of a maximum-security prison. Instead, he found himself in a Category D open prison, a facility meant for prisoners who were considered low risk, those who were supposedly on their way to rehabilitation. Why was he there? Well, that's where the system messed up. It's possible that overcrowding forced the transfer. Maybe prison officials believed he had changed after spending a few years behind bars. Or perhaps it was a case of underestimating just how dangerous and manipulative he really was. Either way, they gave Farnan exactly what he needed, an opportunity. And this time, He wouldn't even need a plan. Now let me explain something about open prisons. These places are completely different from your standard high-security facilities. There are no massive concrete walls, no towers with armed guards, no barbed wire fences keeping inmates locked in. Instead, prisoners are given a certain level of trust. They're allowed to work jobs, take educational courses, and even spend time outside of their cells without strict supervision. And here's the key detail. They don't keep the gates locked. You heard that right. If you really wanted to leave, you could just walk away, which is exactly what Joe Farnan did. Unlike his first escape in 2000, where he had to stage a fake suicide, attack a guard, and trick his way out of a maximum security prison this time, he didn't have to do anything. There was no dramatic chase, no violence, no struggle. One night, Joe Farnan simply walked away. That's it. Just imagine it. He waits until the evening, when the guards are relaxed. The routine is predictable. He probably kept his head down all day, acting like any other prisoner, showing no signs that he was planning to run. And then, when the moment was right, he just left, disappeared into the night like a ghost. And by the time anyone realized he was missing, he was already long gone. This time, Farnan was determined to stay free longer than before. After his first escape in 2000, he had only managed to evade authorities for a few days before they caught him. But now, he was on the run for 2 whole months. That's 8 weeks of freedom, while police across the country were searching for him. Now, how did he manage to stay hidden? Well, here's what we know about career criminals who go on the run. They cut ties. No phone calls, no contact with family or close friends. They stay mobile, never in one place for too long. They avoid their old habits, staying away from criminal activity that might draw attention. And most importantly, they always have a plan. Farnan was smart. He had already escaped before, which meant he knew what mistakes to avoid this time around. He blended in, likely using fake names, moving through different locations, and staying off the grid. But no matter how careful he was, he couldn't hide forever. After 2 months, police finally caught up with him. We don't know exactly how they found him, but usually, when a fugitive is on the run for this long, it's because they slipped up. Maybe he used a credit card, called an old contact, or stayed somewhere too long. Someone turned him in. When a fugitive is high profile, sometimes informants or criminal associates will tip off the police in exchange for a reward. Either way, Joe Farnan was back behind bars. You'd think, after escaping twice, the system would finally realize this man was a serious flight risk, that they'd lock him up tighter than ever before, maybe even move him to a Category A prison where escape was impossible. But no, because as bad as this escape was, the real embarrassment for the authorities was still to come. Because in 2007, Farnan would pull off his biggest, boldest, and most humiliating escape yet. And this time, he would have help. What happened next? How did he manage to escape from a high-security facility? And how did the UK's justice system let the same man slip through their fingers 3 times? Stay tuned, because Joe Farnan was just getting started. All right, picture this. January 8th, 2007. HMP Wormwood Scrubs, one of the toughest prisons in London, a place where high-risk offenders are kept under heavy security. But for Joe Farnan, this wasn't a dead end. It was just another obstacle. And if there was one thing he had mastered, escaping. This time, though, he knew it wouldn't be as easy as walking away like in 2005, or even tricking the guards like in 2000. No, This time, he was inside a maximum security facility. If he wanted to break out, he needed something big, something that had never been done before, and so he planned. Late at night, inside his prison cell, Farnan suddenly collapsed. His body convulsed violently, his limbs jerking uncontrollably. His breathing was ragged, his eyes rolled back. He was having a seizure. At least that's what the guards thought. The emergency alarm rang out, and within seconds, prison officers rushed to his cell. This wasn't just any prisoner. This was a high-risk escape artist. They had to act fast. Guards called for a medical emergency transport. A prison van was ordered to take him to Hammersmith Hospital for immediate care. The trap was set. Farnan was loaded into a secure transport van, shackled and flanked by 3 armed guards. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. The van rolled out of HMP Wormwood Scrubs, heading straight for Hammersmith Hospital, just a short drive away. Everything was going exactly as planned, but the moment the van arrived at the hospital, all hell broke loose. 2 masked men, waiting in the shadows, sprang into action. One was carrying a handgun. The other, a pair of bolt cutters. They moved with military precision, their timing perfect. Bang! The shatter of glass filled the air as the gunman smashed the driver's window. Before the guards could react, the barrel of a loaded gun was pressed against one of their heads. Unlock him! Now! They had no choice. Within seconds, Farnan was free. The gunman covered him while the second masked man snapped off the handcuffs with the bolt cutters. Then, without a moment's hesitation, the 3 men sprinted to a waiting black getaway car. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched against the pavement. And just like that, they were gone. The entire escape took less than 2 minutes. By the time authorities could even process what had happened, Farnan was already miles away. No gunshots were fired, no guards were injured. Just like that, one of the UK's most notorious criminals had vanished into thin air. A nationwide manhunt was launched immediately. Roadblocks went up. Helicopters were deployed. Every law enforcement agency in the country was put on high alert. But it didn't matter. Joe Farnan had escaped again, and this time, the entire country was watching. Joe Farnan was gone. He hadn't just slipped through the cracks. He had shattered the system's confidence. A Category B prisoner, one of the UK's most dangerous escape risks, had just vanished in broad daylight using a Hollywood-style ambush. A man locked inside one of London's toughest prisons had walked free, right under the noses of our armed officers. For the UK prison system, this wasn't just an escape. It was an embarrassment. The authorities had no choice but to act fast. The second Farnan disappeared into the streets of London. The biggest manhunt in the country was underway. Every police unit in the city was put on high alert. Roadblocks were set up on highways, train stations were monitored, and ports were checked in case he tried to flee the country. Known associates were questioned, their homes raided one by one. Informants were paid to talk. Anyone with the slightest connection to Farnan was under surveillance. This wasn't just about recapturing a fugitive. This was about saving face. The authorities couldn't afford another mistake, but they were already 4 steps behind. Farnan was smart. He knew London was too hot. Every street, every CCTV camera, every cop on duty was looking for him. So where does a wanted man go when the entire country is hunting him? Somewhere unexpected. He didn't flee to the countryside. He didn't hide out in some abandoned building. He checked into a hotel. That's right, a hotel. In Docklands, East London, Farnan hid in plain sight. Think about it. What's the last place you'd expect a fugitive to be? Most escapees go off the grid, but Farnan knew that being invisible wasn't always about disappearing. Sometimes, it was about blending in. At a hotel, he was just another guest. No one was looking for an escaped prisoner ordering room service and watching TV. But while Farnan was playing it cool, the police were closing in. It took 4 days for the authorities to catch their break. An informant tipped them off. Farnan was in Docklands. That was all they needed. On January 12, 2007, armed police moved in. The hotel was surrounded. Tactical officers stormed in, weapons drawn, moving fast. There was no dramatic chase this time, no struggle. Before Farnan could even process what was happening, he was back in handcuffs. His 4-day taste of freedom? Over. But here's the thing. For most people, this would be the end of the story. For Joe Farnan, it was just another chapter. So, Joe Farnan was back behind bars. But this time, things were different. No more open prisons, no more second chances, no more loopholes to exploit. The system had underestimated him twice, and both times, he made them look like complete fools. Not anymore. This time, the UK prison system was taking no risks. The lockdown. The moment Farnan was processed back into custody, everything changed. He was transferred to a high-security unit, one where escape was impossible. He was monitored 24/7, his every move scrutinized. No more hospital trips, no more transport vulnerabilities. Farnan wasn't just another inmate anymore. He was a symbol of everything wrong with prison security in the UK. And because of that, rules had to change. After his escape, a full-scale review was launched into how the prison system handled prisoner medical transfers. Here's what they found. Hospital visits were one of the biggest security weaknesses in the system. Standard transport procedures made high-risk inmates vulnerable to escape. The risk of outside interference, like Farnan's armed accomplices, had been massively overlooked. This wasn't just about one man escaping. This was about a systemic failure. And when that happens, people have to answer for it. Believe it or not, Farnan's escape didn't just get prison staff in trouble. It dragged a doctor into the mess too. Authorities launched legal proceedings to investigate whether a prison doctor had made the right call in approving Farnan's hospital transfer. Think about it. His entire escape hinged on that medical decision. If Farnan had never been taken to the hospital, the ambush never could have happened. So now, people wanted answers. Had the doctor been too careless? Had Farnan faked his symptoms so well that they had no choice but to approve it? Either way, it was clear. This wasn't just a prison break. This was a high-level failure that shook the system to its core. Let's be real. Very few criminals in the UK's history have embarrassed the justice system like Joe Farnan did. 3 escapes, each one bolder than the last, each one exposing a new weakness in the system, and each time, the authorities had to rebuild their security from the ground up. That's the legacy of Joe Farnan. For most criminals, prison is the end of the road. For Farnan, it was just another obstacle to escape from.